The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. She's mine. 200 guests in evening wear turned as one. Crystal flutes paused mid-air. The string quartet's final note hung suspended, then died. And Callum Vance, worth $11 billion, feared by competitors, courted by governments, reached across the marble divide and took my hand. I should tell you how I got here. But first, let me tell you what it felt like to stand in that ballroom, surrounded by people who had spent the last 3 years pretending I didn't exist, and watch their faces rearrange themselves into something between horror and disbelief. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. 6 months before that night, I was washing dishes in the back kitchen of a catering company called Harman and Finch. My hands raw from industrial soap, my lower back screaming from 8 hours on my feet. My name is Josephine Wren. Most people call me Joe. At 27, I had exactly $412 in my savings account, a studio apartment in Edgewater Commons, the kind of neighborhood where the streetlights flickered more than they shone, and a bachelor's degree in finance that might as well have been printed on toilet paper for all the good it did me. 3 years earlier, I'd been on track. Associate analyst at Pemberton Welch, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. Corner desk on the 43rd floor. A view of the harbour that made me feel like I'd finally clawed my way out of the life I'd been born into. Then I made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. But we'll get to that. The catering company wasn't supposed to be permanent. Nothing in my life post-Pemberton was supposed to be permanent. But temporary has a way of calcifying into forever when you're too tired to fight it. Wren, my supervisor, a pinched woman named Dolores with a perpetual squint, snapped her fingers from the doorway. Service staff called out, "You're working the floor tonight." I looked down at my soap-reddened hands, my stained apron, the industrial grey of the dish station that had become my world. I'm not trained for, "You have a face and 2 working hands. That's the job requirement. Van leaves in 20. Change into whites." The event was at Heartland Manor, a private estate 40 minutes outside the city. I'd heard of it, of course. Everyone had. The Vance family had built it in 1892, and it had hosted presidents, royalty, and more billionaires than I could count. I'd also heard of Callum Vance, though only in the abstract way everyone knows, about people whose net worth exceeds the GDP of small nations. 41 years old, took over Vance Industries at 28 after his father's stroke. Tripled the company's value in a decade. Never married. Rarely photographed with the same woman twice. The tabloids called him the Glacier for his legendary emotional control. I called him nothing, because men like Callum Vance existed in a different universe than women like me. Also, I thought, the service entrance of Heartland Manor opened into a staging area that was larger than my entire apartment. White-jacketed staff moved with military precision, arranging silver trays of canapes that probably cost more per bite than I made in an hour. "Champagne service," the event coordinator said, thrusting a tray into my hands. "Circulate. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact with guests for longer than 3 seconds. Don't—" She paused, looking at me properly for the first time. "Good bone structure. Stay near the main ballroom. The hosts like attractive servers." I swallowed my pride. I'd been swallowing it for 3 years. What was one more night? The ballroom took my breath away. 40-foot ceilings painted with Renaissance-inspired murals. Chandeliers dripping with Venetian crystal, each one worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. Floors of white Calcutta marble veined with gold, so polished I could see my reflection. A ghost in servants' whites drifting among gods. And the guests, women in gowns that moved like liquid, diamonds at their throats catching the light. Men in bespoke suits, their posture broadcasting the particular confidence that comes from never having worried about money a single day in their lives. I recognized several faces from magazine covers. Tech founders, hedge fund managers, a senator who'd been on the news that morning discussing tax policy. They moved through the space like they owned it, which, collectively, they probably did. I circulated. I kept my eyes down. I offered champagne with practiced invisibility. It was almost peaceful, in a way, being unseen. I'd gotten good at it. Then I saw her, Meredith Cole. She was standing near the grand fireplace, a champagne flute dangling elegantly from her fingers. Her auburn hair swept into a chignon that probably cost more than my rent. She wore emerald green. She always wore emerald green, because someone had once told her it brought out her eyes. And her laugh carried across the room like a bell. Surrounding her, 3 men and 2 women, all leaning in, all desperate for her attention. My chest tightened. 3 years ago, Meredith Cole had been my best friend, my roommate, my confidant through 2 failed relationships and 1 near breakdown during finals week. We'd shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. She'd also been the one to destroy my career. I should have turned away, should have retreated to the kitchen and begged Dolores to put me back on dish duty. But something kept me rooted to that marble floor, staring at the woman who had taken everything from me and built a throne from the wreckage. She must have felt my gaze because she turned. Our eyes met. I watched recognition dawn, and then, worse, dismissal. Her gaze swept over my server's uniform, my sensible shoes, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. A small smile curved her lips. She leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something. He looked at me, laughed. The sound hit me like a physical blow. Champagne? The voice came from my right, deep, calm, carrying an undertone of authority that made me straighten instinctively. I turned. The man standing before me was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes the color of winter ice. His suit was charcoal, clearly custom, fitting him with the precision of a second skin. He held no glass, wore no jewelry except a simple watch that probably cost more than a house. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Yes, sir. I offered the tray, hating the slight tremble in my hands. Would you like? You were staring at Meredith Cole. It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth to deny it, to apologize, to do whatever was necessary to keep my job, but something in his gaze stopped me. He wasn't accusing, he was curious. Do you know her? He asked. I used to. The words came out before I could stop them. A long time ago. How long? 3 years. Something flickered behind those pale eyes. What happened 3 years ago? I don't know why I answered. Maybe because he was the first person at this party to look at me like I was human. Maybe because Meredith's laugh still echoed in my ears, mocking and bright. Maybe because I was so tired of being invisible that even negative attention felt like oxygen. She destroyed my life, I said simply, and got promoted for it. The man was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on my tray. Come to this address. Monday, 9 a.m. I stared at the card. Heavy cream stock, embossed lettering, Vance Industries, Executive Suite. When I looked up, the man was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. It wasn't until Dolores yanked me into the kitchen an hour later, demanding to know why I'd been seen fraternizing with the host, that I realized who I'd been talking to. Callum Vance himself. The Glacier had spoken to me, and I had absolutely no idea why. Monday arrived like a verdict. I stood outside the Vance Industries tower at 8:47 a.m., my heart hammering against my ribs, wearing the only professional outfit I still owned. A navy blazer purchased 3 years ago for my first day at Pemberton Welch, paired with black pants that were slightly too short and pumps with heels I'd superglued back together twice. The building rose 62 stories into a cloudless sky, all glass and steel and money. People in expensive clothes streamed past me, briefcases in hand, wireless earbuds in ears, radiating the particular importance of those who belonged. I didn't belong. I knew that with every fibre of my being. But the business card was in my pocket, and something stubborn in me, the same something that had gotten me through 18-hour study sessions and 90-hour work weeks and 3 years of exile, refused to let me walk away. The lobby was a cathedral of polished stone and contemporary art, dominated by a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black granite. Behind it sat 2 women in matching grey suits, their smiles professionally identical. "I'm here to see," I paused, swallowed. "I have an appointment, 9 a.m., with Mr. Vance." Their expressions didn't change, but I felt the temperature drop. "Name?" "Josephine Wren." One of them typed rapidly. The other watched me with barely concealed skepticism, her eyes cataloguing my too short pants, my repaired heels, the slight fraying at the cuffs of my blazer. 47th floor, executive suite. The elevator will require this. She handed me a visitor badge without meeting my eyes. "Mr. Vance does not appreciate lateness." The elevator was mirrored on all sides, so I had no choice but to confront my reflection during the 47th floor ascent. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman playing dress-up, trying to pass in a world that had already rejected her once. The doors opened onto a floor that felt like stepping into another dimension. Cream carpets, so thick my repaired heels sank into them. Walls lined with art that I recognized from textbooks, actual, original pieces that belonged in museums. Floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of the entire city, sprawled beneath us like a model village. "Miss Wren." A woman appeared from nowhere, perhaps 60, silver-haired and immaculate in a dove-grey dress. Her expression gave away nothing. "I'm Helen, Mr. Vance's executive assistant. Please follow me." She led me down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever, past closed doors and quiet offices and people who looked up briefly before returning to their screens. Everything was muted, controlled, deliberate, the aesthetic of absolute power. We stopped before a set of double doors, dark wood, handleless. "A word of advice," Helen said, not unkindly. "Mr. Vance values directness. Don't waste his time with flattery or apology. Say what you mean." Before I could respond, she pressed something, a hidden button, perhaps, and the doors swung inward. The office beyond was not what I expected. No mahogany desk, no leather chair throne. Instead, a vast open space flooded with natural light, furnished minimally with low sofas, a single desk positioned to face the windows, and walls covered entirely in books. Not decorative leather-bound volumes chosen by an interior designer. Actual books, worn and annotated, shelved without regard for aesthetic coherence. Callum Vance stood at the window, his back to me, hands clasped behind him. "Sit," he said, without turning. I sat on one of the low sofas, my knees pressing together, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. He let the silence stretch. 30 seconds. A minute. Long enough for me to study the tension in his shoulders, the grey threads in his dark hair, the way he stood perfectly still, like a man who had learned long ago that stillness was its own form of control. Finally, he turned. In the flat light of day, without champagne flutes and chandelier glow, he looked harder, older. The lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and there was something in his expression that I couldn't name, something watchful and waiting. "You were an analyst at Pemberton Welch," he said. Not a question. My stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I had you looked into. Standard procedure when someone makes accusations at my events." "Accusations?" The word landed like a slap. "I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I answered your question. You said Meredith Cole destroyed your life." "She did." "How?" I held his gaze, remembering Helen's advice. Directness. "She stole my research, an algorithm I'd developed for identifying undervalued pharmaceutical patents. Presented it as her own work to senior partners. When I tried to report it, she produced fabricated evidence that I'd been the one stealing from her." I kept my voice level, though the old anger burned in my chest. I was fired within 48 hours, blacklisted from the industry. She was promoted to senior analyst. Callum Vance studied me for a long moment. "Do you have proof?" I had proof. My laptop was confiscated during the investigation. All my backup files were mysteriously corrupted. The IT department claimed it was a virus. Convenient timing. "And you expect me to believe you over a woman who's been with Pemberton Welch for 5 years, recently promoted to VP?" I stood. I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe the same place as the anger, the humiliation, the 3 years of washing dishes while Meredith climbed higher and higher on the ladder, built from my stolen work. "I don't expect you to believe anything," I said. "You asked a question. I answered. If you brought me here to mock me, congratulations. You've wasted both our time." I turned toward the door. "Sit down, Miss Wren." His voice hadn't risen, hadn't sharpened, but something in its absolute certainty stopped me mid-step. I turned back. He was still watching me with that unreadable expression, but something had shifted. A slight tilt of the head, a fractional easing of tension. "Please," he added. I sat. 3 years ago," he said, moving to the desk and pulling a file from a drawer. "Pemberton Welch pitched me an algorithm for evaluating biotech acquisitions. Revolutionary, they said. Would give Vance Industries a significant edge in identifying undervalued assets." He opened the file, placed it on the coffee table in front of me. I looked down, and the breath left my body. It was my algorithm, my research, my work, reformatted with Pemberton Welch's letterhead and Meredith Cole's name. "I didn't buy it," Callum continued. "Something felt wrong. The methodology was elegant, but the presentation was hollow. Whoever pitched it didn't truly understand what they were selling." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around something hot and sharp. 6 months ago, I had my team dig deeper. We found discrepancies, early draft documents that didn't match the final version, metadata that suggested the original author was someone other than the credited party. He paused. The trail led to a junior analyst named Josephine Wren. terminated for theft. Except the timeline didn't add up. The original documents predated Meredith Cole's involvement by 8 months. I looked up at him. You knew, before the party. You already knew. I suspected. I wanted to confirm. So the champagne question? A test, to see how you'd respond when confronted with someone who'd wronged you. I should have been grateful, should have been relieved that finally, someone believed me. Instead, I felt fury rising in my chest, hot and bright. Is that what this is? A game? You manipulate people at parties and summon them to your office to see how they perform? For the first time, something like surprise flickered across his face. You're angry. You're damn right I'm angry. Do you have any idea what the last 3 years have been like? I lost everything. My career, my savings, my apartment. I wash dishes for a living. I serve champagne to the same people who used to sit in my presentations. And you've had proof sitting in a file for 6 months. Proof that wouldn't hold up in court. Proof that would require additional corroboration to pursue. Then why am I here? Callum Vance sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the individual threads in his charcoal suit, smell the faint scent of something like cedar and rain. Because I'm offering you a job, he said. Not charity, not pity. An actual position with actual responsibilities that utilize your actual talents. I stared at him. Why? Because the algorithm you developed 3 years ago is worth approximately $800 million in predicted value. Because Meredith Cole is currently implementing a version of it for Pemberton Welch's clients, and they were attributing the success to her genius. Because I despise thieves. And because, he paused, something shifting behind those pale eyes. Because you didn't grovel, you didn't beg. You told me I was wasting your time and walked toward the door. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? I didn't answer, couldn't answer. The position is Senior Analyst, Acquisitions Division, he continued. Salary commensurate with experience. Adjusted for your unconventional recent history. You'd report to the department head, but you'd have direct access to me when necessary. And if we build a strong enough case, Meredith Cole will face consequences. Why do you care about consequences? The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its boardroom polish. Because someone once stole something from me, something I couldn't get back, and the person who did it is currently thriving while He stopped, recalibrated. Justice matters, whether the victim is a billionaire or a dishwasher. I thought about my studio apartment, my empty bank account, my hands still red from industrial soap. I thought about Meredith's laugh, ringing across the ballroom. I thought about 3 years of invisibility, of swallowed pride, of watching the life I'd built dissolve into nothing while the person who destroyed it flourished. What's the catch? I asked. The catch is that Pemberton Welch is one of my company's primary financial partners. Pursuing this could cost me significantly. I need to be certain you're worth the investment. And if I'm not, then I'll have made a hiring mistake. It won't be my first. I looked at him, this man made of ice and silence and old money, and saw something unexpected, something almost like hope, buried deep beneath layers of control. Monday, I said. I can start Monday. Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. I'll have Helen send the paperwork. The first week was a gauntlet. Vance Industries occupied 4 floors of the tower, But the acquisitions division commanded the 45th, an open-plan space divided by glass partitions, populated by 43 analysts who viewed my arrival with unconcealed suspicion. I was the outsider, the anomaly, the nobody who'd somehow landed a senior position without going through proper channels. Worse, I was Callum Vance's hire. "He never hires directly," someone whispered at the coffee station on my second day. I recognized her from the orientation materials. Priya Desai, 3 years at the company, gunning for the same senior position I'd been given. Not since his father's stroke. The department heads handle all personnel decisions. "Maybe she's his new project," another voice replied. Male, skeptical. "You know how he gets obsessed with things. Or maybe she's just his type." I kept my eyes on my coffee, my expression neutral, my hands steady. I'd survived Pemberton Welch. I'd survived 3 years of exile. I could survive office gossip. The work itself was demanding, but familiar. A homecoming I hadn't expected. Reviewing acquisition targets, analyzing market positions, building financial models. My mind stretched and flexed like a muscle, too long dormant, remembering what it felt like to be challenged, to be useful, to matter. But the whispers followed me, and so did Callum Vance. He appeared everywhere. In the elevator when I was heading to lunch. At the coffee station I frequented at 3 p.m. Emerging from conference rooms just as I passed by, his gaze would find mine, hold for a moment, then move on, leaving me unsettled in ways I couldn't articulate. On Friday, he summoned me to his office. I found him exactly as I had that first day, standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city below with an expression of profound detachment. "Close the door." I closed it. The click sounded louder than it should have. "How are you finding the work?" "Manageable." "And the team?" I hesitated. "Adjusting." He turned. "They're not adjusting. They're circling, trying to determine your weaknesses." "I'm aware." "Are you?" He moved closer, and I became acutely conscious of his height, his presence, the way he seemed to fill space simply by existing. "Priya Desai has been lobbying for your position since before you arrived. Thomas Chen, the man who made that comment about you being my type, has been leaking internal information to a competitor for 7 months. I'm handling it, but his final act of sabotage will likely target you." I processed this. "Why are you telling me?" "Because you need to be prepared, and because I don't play games with people's careers." "That's not what your reputation suggests." The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyes sharpened. "My reputation," he said slowly, "is exactly what I've designed it to be. Cold, unreachable, a man who feels nothing and wants nothing except profit." "And the truth?" Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the glacier. "The truth is more complicated." We stood there, separated by 3 feet of air and an ocean of unspoken things. I should have dropped my gaze, should have maintained professional distance. Instead, I held his stare, watching the war behind his eyes. Control versus something rawer, more dangerous. "I should get back to work," I said, finally. He nodded, stepped back. The moment broke like glass. "There's a client dinner next Thursday," he said. His voice returned to its usual neutrality. "Pemberton Welch will be attending. I want you there." My heart seized. "Meredith, we'll be there?" "Yes." "You want me to face her?" "I want you to remind her that you exist, that you haven't been erased." He returned to his window. "Think of it as reconnaissance. We can't build a case if we don't understand the enemy." I wanted to argue. to refuse, to protect the fragile peace I'd constructed around my wounds. But he was right. I couldn't hide forever. "Thursday," I said. "I'll be there." The dinner was at Harlow's, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't appear on any map. I knew it only by reputation, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than my old monthly rent, where reservations required references and background checks. I wore black, simple, borrowed from a colleague who owed me a favor after I'd saved her from a major calculation error. The dress was expensive, $3,000 of architectural silk that moved like water, and it fit perfectly, transforming me into someone I barely recognized, someone who belonged. Callum met me at the entrance. He was in charcoal again, always charcoal, I was learning, with slight variations in shade and texture, and his eyes travelled over me with an expression I couldn't decode. "You clean up well, Miss Wren." "Thank you, Mr. Vance." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "Callum, please." The private dining room was a study in restrained opulence. 12 chairs around a long table, already half filled with faces I recognized from financial news and society pages. Candlelight softened the space, dancing off crystal glasses and platinum flatware. And there, at the far end of the table, was Meredith. She saw me at the exact moment I saw her. I watched her face cycle through recognition, confusion, and then something darker, something that looked almost like fear before she schooled it into a professional mask. "Joe," she said, rising from her seat. "What a surprise." "Meredith." The table went quiet. I felt every eye turn toward us, felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us," Meredith continued, her voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. "Are you working for Vance Industries now?" "Senior analyst, acquisitions division." A flicker of something in her eyes. Calculation. "How wonderful for you. A real comeback story." "Something like that." Callum's hand found the small of my back. A light pressure, barely there, but unmistakable. The touch sent electricity through my spine. "Miss Wren is one of our most valuable new acquisitions," he said smoothly. "Her work on biotech valuation models has been particularly impressive." I watched Meredith's face carefully, saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders. She knew. She had to know what he was implying. "Biotech valuation," she repeated. "That's quite a niche specialty." "Miss Wren developed it," Callum continued, steering me toward our seats. 3 years ago, I believe. Revolutionary methodology. I'm still curious how Pemberton Welch arrived at such similar conclusions independently. The silence that followed was devastating. Meredith's smile stayed fixed, but the colour had drained from her face. Across the table, her colleagues exchanged glances. Confusion, suspicion, the dawning awareness that something significant was happening beneath the surface. "Well," Meredith said finally, recovering enough to add a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Great minds think alike, I suppose." "Perhaps," Callum said. "Or perhaps there's another explanation." Dinner was excruciating and exhilarating in equal measure. I barely tasted the food. 7 courses of things with French names and artistic presentations. Because I was too busy watching Meredith across the table, feeling her gaze burning into me every time I looked away. She knew the walls were closing in. I could see it in the way she laughed too loudly, talked too much, filled every silence with chatter designed to distract. After dessert, she cornered me in the hallway outside the restrooms. I don't know what game you're playing, she hissed, all pretense of pleasantry abandoned, but you need to stop. Game? I kept my voice level. I'm just doing my job, Meredith. Your job is destroying everything I've built. No, that was your job 3 years ago. I stepped closer, surprising myself with my own steadiness. You destroyed my career, my reputation, my life, and you got promoted for it. You can't prove anything. Not yet. Fear flashed across her face. Real fear. And something else. Something that looked almost like desperation. Joe, listen to me. You don't understand what's at stake. The people I work for, the things I know. She stopped herself. Swallowed. This is bigger than you. Bigger than both of us. Walk away while you still can. Is that a threat? It's a warning. From someone who used to care about you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Care about me? You gutted my entire existence and stepped over my corpse on your way to the corner office. I did what I had to do. Her voice dropped. You have no idea what they're capable of. What they made me do. They? But she was already backing away, composing herself, smoothing her dress. When she turned back to the dining room, she was Meredith Cole again, poised, professional, untouchable. I stood in that hallway for a long moment, her words echoing in my head. What they made me do. There was more to this story, more than theft, more than betrayal. And somehow I was going to find out what. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in controlled tension. I threw myself into work, arriving early and leaving late, building financial models that exceeded every benchmark. The whispers about my hiring began to fade, replaced by grudging respect from colleagues who couldn't deny my results. But Callum Vance remained a constant distraction. He had a way of appearing at moments when I least expected him. In the break room at 7 a.m., in the elevator at midnight, in the corridor outside my office when I was leaving for the day. Each encounter was brief, professional, unremarkable to anyone watching. But I felt them, every one. There was something building between us, something neither of us acknowledged. A current running beneath every polite exchange, every accidental brush of fingers when handing off documents, every too long glance across crowded conference rooms. I told myself it was gratitude. He'd given me my career back. It was natural to feel something, but gratitude didn't explain the way my pulse raced when he said my name. Didn't explain the dreams that left me gasping in the dark. Didn't explain the way his presence seemed to rearrange the air itself. 3 weeks after the Harlows' dinner, he invited me to a working lunch. We need to discuss the Pemberton Welch situation, he said, his voice perfectly neutral. My office, 1 o'clock. When I arrived, the blinds were drawn and food was laid out on the coffee table. Not catered trays, but something simpler. Fresh bread, imported cheese, olive oil in a small ceramic bowl. You do this for all your analysts? I asked, settling onto the low sofa. No. He sat across from me, closer than strictly necessary. Just the ones whose cases require discretion. My case? Our case. He poured olive oil onto a small plate, tore a piece of bread. My investigators have made progress. Meredith Cole didn't act alone. I went still. What do you mean? 3 years ago, someone at Pemberton Welch orchestrated your termination. They provided Meredith with the fabricated evidence, corrupted your backup files, coordinated with IT and HR to ensure a seamless elimination. He paused. That level of coordination requires authority, senior authority. Who? Victor Aldrich. The name hit me like a physical blow. Victor Aldrich, managing partner, the man who'd shaken my hand at orientation, who'd praised my work in quarterly reviews, who'd personally approved my termination. "He's the one who fired me," I said quietly. He looked me in the eye and told me I'd brought shame on the firm. He was protecting his investment. Meredith Cole is his protégé, his carefully cultivated asset. The algorithm you developed threatened to expose her, and by extension, him, as frauds. So they eliminated the threat. Systematically. Callum's jaw tightened. Aldrich has been running this operation for over a decade, finding talented analysts, grooming protégés to steal their work, taking credit for the innovation. You weren't the first victim, just the one who got closest to exposing the pattern. I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. Meredith's warning at Harlow's, the people I work for, what they made me do. She was recruited, I said slowly. Meredith. He found her, trained her, used her. And now she's trapped, complicit in crimes that would end her career and possibly her freedom, if exposed. He met my eyes. She's not innocent, Josephine, but she's also not the architect of your destruction. That honor belongs to Aldrich. My throat was tight. What do we do? We build a case, documented evidence, testimony, financial records that prove the pattern. He leaned forward. And we give Meredith a choice. Help us bring down Aldrich, or fall with him. You think she'll turn on him? I think she's been looking for a way out for 3 years, and I think you might be the only person she trusts enough to take it. The conversation shifted something between us. After that lunch, Callum began including me in meetings I had no business attending, strategy sessions with department heads, calls with board members, private briefings on acquisitions that hadn't been announced to the public. It was exposure, education, an apprenticeship I hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. People are talking, I told him one evening, alone in his office after everyone else had gone home. They think. I know what they think. Doesn't it bother you? He looked up from the document he was reviewing. The lamp on his desk cast half his face in shadow, emphasizing the sharp line of his jaw, the silver at his temples. What bothers me, he said slowly, is that you care what they think. I spent 3 years being invisible, reputation as the only currency I have left. Then we'll rebuild it properly on the foundation of your actual accomplishments. We, the word hung between us. He set down his pen. Josephine. My name in his mouth was something different, deliberate, weighted. I don't, he stopped, started again. I'm not accustomed to explaining myself. You don't have to. I want to. He stood, moved around the desk until he was standing in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. You intrigue me. Your mind, your resilience, the way you refuse to break, even when breaking would be easier. My heart was hammering. Callum, I haven't felt intrigue in a very long time. I'd forgotten what it was like to want to understand someone. To want... He stopped himself, stepped back. The shutters came down. Forgive me, that was inappropriate. Was it? The question escaped before I could stop it. His eyes found mine, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something behind the ice, something burning. Yes, he said, quietly. It was. He returned to his chair, I returned to my work, and we pretended that nothing had shifted, even though we both knew everything had. The Vance Foundation Gala was the social event of the season. Held annually at Heartland Manor, The same estate where I'd first encountered Callum as a server. It raised millions for underprivileged education and drew the most powerful people in the country. This year, I wasn't serving champagne. I was attending as a guest. The invitation had arrived at my desk in a cream envelope, hand-delivered by Helen herself. Miss Wren, the board of the Vance Foundation requests the honor of your presence. He wants everyone to see you, Helen had said, her expression unreadable. In your proper place. I'd spent an embarrassing portion of my savings on a dress. Deep burgundy silk, architectural cut. The kind of thing I never would have considered in my old life. When I caught my reflection in the manor's grand entrance mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back was someone different, someone who belonged. Callum found me within minutes of my arrival. He was in black tonight, formal, severe, devastating. His eyes travelled over me with an intensity that made my breath catch. You look, he paused, appropriate. I laughed despite myself. Appropriate. That's the adjective you're going with? Something softened in his expression, almost a smile. The alternatives seemed inadvisable in a professional context. And what would they be in a non-professional context? His gaze held mine. Dangerous territory, Miss Wren. Joe, I said, if we're discussing dangerous territory, you might as well use my name. Joe. The syllable was quiet, deliberate, like he was tasting it. We should find your seat. The dinner was a blur of introductions and small talk. Powerful people whose names I'd only read in newspapers, treating me as an equal. I sat at Callum's table, the host's table, and felt every eye in the room cataloguing my presence, calculating my significance. Meredith was there too. Different table, different orbit, but I felt her watching me throughout the meal. Her expression was impossible to read. After dinner, as guests mingled through the manor's connected rooms, she appeared at my elbow. Can we talk? Privately? I followed her to a small library off the main corridor. She closed the door behind us. I've been thinking, she said, without preamble, about what you said at Harlow's, about what I did. And I'm tired, Joe. She looked exhausted suddenly, older than her years. I've been tired for a long time, playing a role I never wanted, protecting people who don't deserve protection. Then stop. It's not that simple. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkened grounds. Aldrich has leverage on me. Things I did, things he made me do, that would destroy me if they came to light. What kinds of things? Financial irregularities, client manipulation, activities that cross the line from unethical into illegal. She turned back to me. He recruited me out of college, Joe. I was desperate, drowning in debt, taking care of my mother, no prospects. He offered me everything. All I had to do was follow his instructions. By the time I realized what I was really doing, it was too late. Yes. I studied her face. The Meredith I'd known, my roommate, my friend, was still in there somewhere, buried under years of compromise and fear. Callum wants to bring him down, I said. He has investigators building a case. But we need testimony, first-hand accounts. And you think I should be one of them? I think you're the only one who can. She was quiet for a long moment. He'll destroy me, whatever credibility I have left. Or you could help destroy him first. I stepped closer. You stole 3 years of my life, Meredith. You owe me this. But more than that, you owe yourself a way out. Tears were forming in her eyes. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. I didn't want to. He made me. I know. You do? I've had 3 years to think about it, to remember who you were before. I reached out, took her hand. This is your chance to be that person again. She squeezed my fingers, nodded slowly. Okay, I'll help you. I'll tell you everything. We returned to the gala separately, composing ourselves, preparing to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I found Callum near the grand staircase, deep in conversation with a silver-haired man I recognized from news coverage, a federal prosecutor, if I remembered correctly. As I approached, Callum's gaze found mine. Something in his expression shifted. A question. I nodded slightly. He excused himself from the prosecutor and made his way to my side. She agreed. She'll testify. She has records, too. Documents Aldrich doesn't know she kept. For the first time since I'd known him, Callum Vance looked genuinely surprised. You convinced her? In what? 20 minutes? I gave her what Aldrich never did. A choice. He studied me with an intensity that made my skin warm. You continue to exceed expectations, Joe. Careful. That almost sounded like a compliment. It was. Around us, the gala continued. Champagne and laughter and the subtle theatre of wealth. But we stood in our own private sphere, suspended in a moment that felt significant in ways I couldn't articulate. Dance with me, he said suddenly. What? The orchestra's playing. It's a gala. People dance at galas. He extended his hand. Unless you'd rather refuse? I shouldn't have accepted. Every rule of professional conduct, every instinct for self-preservation, screamed that this was a mistake. But I took his hand anyway. He led me to the dance floor, and as the music swelled around us, I felt his arm circle my waist, felt the heat of his palm through the silk of my dress. People are watching, I murmured. Let them watch. Callum? I know. His voice was low, meant only for me. I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons we shouldn't. He stopped, drew me closer. But I'm tired of reasons. I looked up at him, this man of ice and silence, and saw the cracks spreading through his control. The hunger he couldn't quite hide. So am I admitted. We danced, and for those few minutes, nothing else existed. Not the watching eyes, not the looming confrontation with Aldrich, not the 3 years of exile that had brought me to this moment. There was only the music, and his arms, and the beginning of something neither of us could name. The morning after the gala, everything shattered. I arrived at the office to find my access badge disabled. Security guards flanked the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral. Miss Wren, please come with us. They escorted me to a conference room on the 47th floor. Not Callum's floor, but the legal department. Inside, 3 people waited. A woman in a severe suit I recognized as corporate counsel, a man from HR, and a face I hadn't expected. Thomas Chen. What's going on? I demanded. Miss Wren. The corporate counsel gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit down. I'll stand. Her lips thinned. Very well. We've received serious allegations regarding your conduct. Specifically, charges of industrial espionage. The floor dropped from beneath me. What? Evidence has been submitted suggesting that you've been passing proprietary information to competitors, including detailed acquisition strategies and confidential client data. That's insane. I haven't. The evidence is quite comprehensive. She slid a folder across the table. Emails from your work account, file transfer logs, communications with external parties. I opened the folder, saw fabricated evidence I'd never seen before, emails I'd never written, logs of activities I'd never performed. The same pattern, the same playbook. "This isn't real," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone manufactured this. That's what we're here to determine." The HR representative leaned forward. "Your access has been suspended pending investigation. You're required to surrender all company devices immediately." "I need to speak with Callum Vance." "Mr. Vance is unavailable." "Then make him available. He'll vouch for—" "Mr. Vance," Thomas Chen interrupted, speaking for the first time, "is the one who requested this investigation." The words hit me like a physical blow. "No, that's not—" "The evidence was brought to his attention this morning. He authorized the suspension himself." I looked at Thomas Chen, at the barely concealed triumph in his eyes, and understood. He was Aldrich's man. Had been all along. And this was his final act of sabotage, just as Callum had predicted. But Callum had known, had warned me, had told me exactly what was coming. Why would he authorize this investigation? Unless— "I want my lawyer," I said. "Of course. We'll arrange a supervised call." The counsel gathered her papers. "In the meantime, please surrender your devices and badge. Security will escort you out." I spent the next 8 hours in a small apartment that I barely recognized as mine, alternating between rage and despair. My phone rang constantly. Blocked numbers, unknown callers, but I didn't answer. At midnight, someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and felt my heart stop. Callum Vance stood in my hallway, still in his suit from the day, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. I opened the door. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. He entered my modest studio, looked around at the second-hand furniture and the too small kitchen and the life I'd been living since my fall from grace. If he judged me for it, his face didn't show it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened today. You authorized the investigation." "I had to." He turned to face me. "Chen was recording everything. The moment I defended you, the evidence would have been released publicly, uncontrolled, devastating. So you threw me to the wolves instead. I gave us time." He moved closer. "The investigation will take weeks. During those weeks, my team can analyze the fabricated evidence, trace its origin, build our case against Chen and Aldrich. By the time it concludes, we'll have proof of conspiracy." "And if it doesn't work, if the evidence holds up?" "It won't." "You can't know that." "I can." His hand rose, hovering near my cheek, but not quite touching. "Because I know you. Because I've spent weeks watching you work, watching you rebuild, watching you refuse to break. You're not capable of what they're accusing you of." "That's not evidence." "No, but this is." He pulled a phone from his pocket. Not his usual device, something cheaper, clearly disposable. "Meredith's testimony, recorded this afternoon, before Chen made his move. She gave us everything. Names, dates, documents, the entire operation. Aldrich is finished." I stared at the phone. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to trust me, and I know I've given you very little reason to. You suspended me. My colleagues think I'm a criminal. Temporarily, necessarily." He exhaled. "I should have warned you, should have prepared you for what was coming. But I couldn't risk—" He stopped, started again. "Chen had access to my communications, any hint that I knew about his plan, and he would have accelerated, caught us unprepared." "So you let me walk in blind?" "Yes." The honesty was brutal, unadorned, exactly what I'd learned to expect from him. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I chose strategy over your comfort. Your safety. It was wrong. Was it effective? We'll know soon. I looked at him. This man who had pulled me from obscurity, who had given me weapons to fight my own battles, who had just sacrificed my reputation to protect a larger goal. I should be furious with you, I said. You should be. I am. I know. But I also understand. I moved away from him, needing distance to think. This is how you operate. Chess moves, calculated sacrifices, acceptable losses. That's not... He stopped himself. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. I never considered you acceptable to lose. Then what am I? The question hung between us. He was silent for a long moment. Unexpected, he finally said. Inconvenient. Impossible to ignore. His eyes met mine. Essential. I should have demanded clarification, should have pushed him to define exactly what he meant. Instead, I crossed the space between us and kissed him. His response was immediate, arms around me, pulling me close, a sound like relief escaping his throat. He kissed me like a man who'd been starving, like he'd been waiting for this moment without knowing he was waiting. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, his forehead pressed against mine. This complicates things, he murmured. Does it? Significantly. But he was smiling, the first real smile I'd seen from him, something open and wondering and young. I'm not particularly good at uncomplicated. Neither am I. He kissed me again. And for a few hours I forgot about Chen and Aldrich and the investigation hanging over my head. There was only Callum, only this. The next week was warfare. Chen escalated his attacks. Anonymous leaks to financial press painted me as a corporate spy, a seductress who'd climbed into Callum Vance's bed to steal his secrets. The stories were vicious, detailed, designed to destroy. I watched my name trend on social media, watched strangers dissect my life, my appearance, my supposed crimes. And I kept working. From my apartment, with borrowed devices, I helped Callum's team trace the fabricated evidence. Meredith provided crucial context. Dates when Aldrich had been out of the office. IP addresses that didn't match the supposed activity. Inconsistencies that could only exist if the evidence was manufactured. The picture that emerged was damning. Chen had been planning this for months. He'd created backdated files, spoofed my credentials, built a case so thorough that any normal investigation would have convicted me. But he'd made mistakes, small ones, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. We found them all. On day 10 of the investigation, Callum called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited. Technically, I was still suspended. But I watched from a conference room on a different floor, video feed streaming to my borrowed laptop. Ladies and gentlemen, Callum began, his voice carrying the particular weight of someone about to detonate a bomb. I've asked you here because Vance Industries has been compromised. Murmurs around the table. Chen, seated near the far end, looked confident. Over the past 2 weeks, you've heard allegations against Josephine Wren, our senior analyst in acquisitions. Evidence suggested she was passing information to competitors. Callum paused. That evidence was fabricated. Chen's expression flickered. What we've discovered instead is a conspiracy reaching back over a decade. Thomas Chen has been feeding proprietary information to a network of competitors and hostile entities, using his position to coordinate attacks on analysts who threatened to expose him. This is absurd, Chen sputtered. You're protecting your... I'm presenting facts. Callum pressed a button. Images appeared on the conference room screens. Financial records, communications, metadata analysis. These are the actual transfer logs from Mr. Chen's devices. Tracing his communications over the past 18 months shows regular contact with Victor Aldrich, managing partner at Pemberton Welch. The room went silent. Aldrich has been running an operation to steal intellectual property from multiple firms, Callum continued. Miss Wren was one of his earliest targets. Her algorithm was stolen 3 years ago and credited to an Aldrich protégé. When we began investigating, Chen was activated to discredit her before she could testify. Chen was on his feet now. "You can't prove any of this." "We can." Callum's voice was ice. "We have testimony from the protégée herself. We have documentation from multiple victims. And we have your communications with Aldrich, recovered from server backups you didn't know existed." Security entered the room, 2 men in suits, moving with quiet efficiency. "Thomas Chen," Callum said, "you're terminated, effective immediately. Federal authorities have been notified and will be in contact." I watched Chen escorted from the room, watched the shock and horror on the board members' faces, and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Vindication. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Aldrich was arrested 48 hours later, federal agents descending on Pemberton Welch's offices with warrants for fraud, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy. The news exploded. Headlines, talking heads, breathless coverage of the biggest corporate scandal in a decade. Meredith turned state's witness, providing testimony that helped dismantle Aldrich's entire network. In exchange, she received immunity for her own crimes and a chance to start over. We had dinner 2 weeks after the arrest at a quiet restaurant far from the chaos. "I'm moving," she said, pushing food around her plate. "London, maybe. Somewhere I can be someone else. Fresh start." "Attempt at one, anyway." She looks up at me. "You know what's funny? I spent 3 years terrified that you'd come back, that you'd expose everything, and when you finally did..." She shook her head. "It felt like relief. Prison's still a possibility for Aldrich's inner circle." "I know, but even prison would be better than what I was living." She reached across the table, took my hand. "Thank you, Joe, for giving me a choice. Thank you for taking it." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since our college days. "Will you keep in touch? I know I don't deserve..." "I will. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some can." 3 years of anger had taught me the difference between people who hurt you for pleasure and people who hurt you because they were drowning. Meredith had been drowning. She'd almost pulled me under with her, but she'd also been the one to throw me a rope in the end. The weeks after Aldrich's arrest should have been triumphant. My name was cleared. The investigation concluded with a formal apology from Vance Industries' board. I was reinstated, promoted, given the kind of public rehabilitation I dreamed about during 3 years of exile. But triumph has a way of revealing emptiness. The media attention was relentless. Every outlet wanted my story. The wronged analyst, the billionaire savior, the dramatic fall and rise. They painted it as a fairy tale, complete with romantic undertones that weren't entirely inaccurate. Callum and I had been careful, discreet. Our relationship existed in the spaces between public scrutiny, private dinners, late nights at his penthouse, mornings that felt stolen from someone else's life. But discretion has limits. The photos surfaced on a Wednesday. Someone had caught us leaving a restaurant together, his hand at the small of my back. our faces too close for professional distance. The headlines were predictable. Billionaire's secret romance with scandal star. From dishwasher to diamond, how Jo Wren seduced her way to the top. I told myself it didn't matter. I knew the truth. He knew the truth. But the world's version began to corrode something inside me. Ignore them, Callum said that night, finding me on his penthouse balcony, staring at the city below. They'll move on. Will they? I'm the narrative now. The gold digger, the social climber who manufactured a scandal to catch a billionaire. No one who matters believes that. Everyone who matters believes that. I turned to face him. You're bored. Your investors, the same people who just apologized to me, they're reading these as stories and wondering if I played them. Let them wonder. Callum. My voice broke on his name. I can't. This is everything I was afraid of, being defined by my connection to you instead of my own accomplishments. Then we'll change the narrative. How? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll step back. What? From us. From this. His voice was steady, but I saw the cost in his eyes. Publicly, you can establish yourself independently, build your reputation without my shadow over it. Once you're secure, no. The word came out sharper than I intended. I'm not asking you to sacrifice. You're not asking. I'm offering. And I'm refusing. I stepped closer, took his face in my hands. I spent 3 years invisible, powerless, waiting for someone else to validate my existence. I'm not doing that again. Then what do you want? I thought about it. Really thought. For the first time since this had all begun. I want to stop hiding, I said finally. I want to stand next to you in public and let them write whatever they want. Because I know who I am. I want to build something real instead of constantly defending against something false. That's a difficult path. I know. The scrutiny will be constant. I know. My enemies will become your enemies. They already have. He studied me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Something I'd never seen before. Wonder. You continue to surprise me, Josephine Wren. Joe. He pulled me closer. Then we stop hiding. Together. The press conference was Callum's idea. 1 week after the photos leaked, we stood together in Vance Industries' main auditorium, facing a crowd of reporters and cameras. I'll keep this brief, Callum began. Recent coverage has speculated about my personal relationship with Josephine Wren. I'm here to confirm we are romantically involved. Murmurs, flashing cameras. I'm also here to clarify the circumstances of that relationship. Miss Wren was hired based on her professional qualifications and the discovery of a historic injustice against her. Our personal connection developed afterward. Not before, not as a condition of employment, not as part of any transactional arrangement. He turned to me. An invitation. I stepped to the microphone. 3 years ago, I said, I was fired for a crime I didn't commit. I lost my career, my reputation, and my sense of self. I spent those years rebuilding from nothing, washing dishes, serving champagne, being invisible to people who once respected me. The room was silent. Mr. Vance gave me a chance, not because of attraction or manipulation, but because evidence suggested I'd been wronged. Everything that followed, the investigation, the vindication, what exists between us personally, grew from professional respect, not from any fairy tale the media wants to tell. I paused. Let the words settle. I'm not here to apologize for falling in love. I'm here to claim my own story. before someone else writes it for me. The press conference changed the landscape. Not overnight. Narratives that entrenched don't dissolve instantly, but gradually the coverage shifted. Journalists who'd been content to repeat rumors began investigating the actual story. Features appeared in major publications, detailing the systemic fraud that had destroyed my career and the investigation that had exposed it. I became, improbably, a symbol. Other victims of corporate theft reached out. Analysts and researchers who'd been dismissed, discredited, erased. They shared their stories, and slowly, a pattern emerged. Aldrich wasn't unique. His methods weren't isolated. The entire industry had been looking the other way for decades. We could do more, I told Callum one evening, documents spread across his coffee table. Create a foundation, legal resources for victims who can't afford to fight back. An advocacy network that names and shames the perpetrators. He looked up from the financial projections I'd been developing. You've been thinking about this? For weeks. It would require significant capital. I know. And it would make us targets. Anyone profiting from the current system will see us as enemies. I know that too. He was silent for a moment. Then, draft a proposal. I'll fund the initial operation. If we can prove impact within the first year, we'll expand. Just like that. Just like that. He reached across the table, took my hand. You've been waiting to fight this battle for 3 years. I'm not going to stand in your way. The Wren Foundation launched 6 months later. Callum provided initial funding. I provided direction, expertise, and a face that victims could recognize. Someone who'd survived what they were experiencing. Within a year, we'd assisted 47 cases. Recovered stolen research worth over $200 million. Helped 12 whistleblowers navigate legal systems designed to crush them. And in the process, I found something I'd lost long ago. Purpose. The work was consuming, exhausting, emotionally devastating sometimes, when cases didn't go our way or victims couldn't be reached in time. But it was real. Mine. Built on my own terms, regardless of my connection to Callum Vance. The board of Vance Industries took notice. So did the industry at large. You're becoming a problem, Victor Aldrich said. I was visiting him in federal prison, not for closure, but for information. He had connections, networks, knowledge that could help us identify other predators. I prefer inconvenience, I replied. He laughed. Behind the prison jumpsuit and the fluorescent lighting, he still carried himself like a man who expected to win. You think you've changed something? The system I built is one hydra among thousands. Cut off my head, 10 more take my place. Then I'll cut off 10 more heads. With what resources? Vance can't fund you forever, and when his patience runs out. His patience isn't part of the equation. Aldrich leaned forward, his eyes sharp. You really believe that? You're sleeping with a man worth $11 billion, and you think the relationship isn't transactional? I think you can't imagine any other kind. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Mark my words, Miss Wren. Callum Vance is using you, just like I used Meredith. The specifics vary, but the structure's the same. He saw an opportunity and exploited it. Thank you for your concern. Enjoy the fairy tale while it lasts. I left the prison with Aldrich's words echoing in my head. Not because I believed them, I knew Callum better than that, but because they reminded me of something important. Trust is fragile. Even well-earned trust can fracture under enough pressure. And pressure, in our world, was always coming. The attack came from an unexpected direction. Callum's father, Gregory Vance, had suffered a stroke 12 years earlier, leaving him partially paralyzed and entirely bitter. He'd been forced to hand control of the family empire to his son, a transfer he'd never forgiven. From his estate in the countryside, he'd spent a decade undermining Callum. Board challenges, media leaks, quiet campaigns to erode his son's authority. I'd met him exactly once, at a family obligation Callum couldn't avoid. He'd looked at me the way one looks at an insect, something to be examined briefly, then crushed. "You're the project," he'd said, his voice slurred but sharp. "The rescued bird. My son always did have a weakness for broken things." "Takes one to know one," I'd replied. He'd laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Gregory's latest attack came in the form of a board motion, citing conflicts of interest and degradation of corporate focus. He'd convinced 3 directors to support a proposal restricting Callum's authority. If passed, key decisions would require board approval, effectively neutering the CEO position. "He's been building this for months," Callum said. Documents spread across his desk. "Cultivating relationships, making promises. He's offering board seats to their allies in exchange for support. Can you fight it? Possibly, but it would require exposing family conflicts I've kept private for years, and it would distract from everything else we're trying to accomplish." I studied the documents, the board structure, the voting thresholds. "You have 4 loyal directors," I said slowly. "Gregory has 3. That leaves 5 in play. The moderates, they'll vote for whoever offers the most stability." "Then give them stability." I pulled a chart toward me. "The foundation's work, the positive press, the industry leadership position you've established. Present that as evidence of clear direction, contrasted with Gregory's history of disruption. He'll counter that the foundation is my personal indulgence, evidence that I am distracted by," he stopped, "by me." He won't say it directly, but the implication would be accurate. I met his eyes. "Callum, if I'm the liability?" "No." His voice was absolute. "I refuse to sacrifice what we've built because my father can't accept his own irrelevance." "Then we need another strategy." The solution came from Helen. Callum's executive assistant had worked for the Vance family for over 30 years. She'd served Gregory before his stroke and had stayed with Callum through everything that followed. "There's something you should know," she said, appearing in my office one afternoon. "About Gregory, about why he really pushed this motion." She handed me a folder. Inside, financial records, communication logs, documents that painted a picture I hadn't expected. "He's broke," I said, scanning the pages. "His personal holdings are nearly depleted. Bad investments, medical expenses, a lifestyle he refused to scale back." Helen's expression was carefully neutral. "The board seat compensation is his only reliable income. If Callum's authority is restricted, Gregory can position himself as an advisor. Additional compensation, a return to relevance. This isn't about the company, it's about money. And pride. He can't accept that his son succeeded where he failed." I sat with the information, turning it over in my mind. If we expose this, Gregory will deny everything, claim the documents are fabricated, make himself a martyr. Then we don't expose it, we use it. Helen raised an eyebrow. "How?" "We offer him an alternative, something that addresses his actual needs, financial security, relevance, without destroying his son's position." You want to negotiate with the man who's trying to destroy you? I smiled. I want to give him a choice. Same thing I gave Meredith. The meeting was arranged for Gregory's estate. I went alone. Callum protested, but I insisted. This needed to be my confrontation, not his. Gregory received me in his study, a room designed to intimidate. Dark wood, hunting trophies, portraits of Vance's ancestors glaring from the walls. The bird comes to negotiate, he said. Brave, pragmatic. I took the seat across from him, uninvited. I know why you're doing this. Do you? I placed the financial records on his desk, watched his expression shift from contempt to something closer to fear. Your investments failed. Your expenses exceeded your income. You're months away from having to sell this estate or face public embarrassment. Where did you? It doesn't matter. What matters is what happens next. He was silent, his eyes calculating. Option 1, I continued. You proceed with the board motion. We counter by releasing evidence of your financial situation and your history of personal attacks on your son. The motion fails. Your reputation is destroyed. You lose the board position entirely. You wouldn't. Option 2. You withdraw the motion. Publicly support Callum's leadership. In exchange, the Wren Foundation creates an honorary advisory role with a salary that covers your expenses. You get financial stability and continued relevance. Callum gets family peace. Gregory stared at me. You're bribing me. I'm offering a dignified exit from a fight you can't win. My son put you up to this. Your son doesn't know I'm here. I leaned forward. This is me, Mr. Vance. The rescued bird, offering you a choice no one else will. The silence stretched. I watched emotions war across his face. Pride, rage, calculation, and finally, something like resignation. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Neither are you. He looked at the documents, at me, at the portraits of his ancestors, frozen in their frames. The advisory role, he said. It would be public. Press release, photos, the whole thing. And my son would agree? I'll make sure of it. Another long silence. Then Gregory Vance, patriarch of an empire he could no longer control, nodded slowly. Option 2, he said. But I want the terms in writing. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. I attended as a guest. Callum's partner, foundation director, officially nothing more. But everyone in that room knew the dynamics had shifted. Gregory arrived with his lawyer and a revised statement. After careful consideration, he announced, his voice carrying its permanent slur but its authority intact. I'm withdrawing my motion. My son has my full confidence and support in leading this company forward. Shock rippled through the boardroom. The 3 directors who'd backed Gregory exchanged glances, their carefully laid plans collapsing. Furthermore, Gregory continued, I'm pleased to announce my appointment as honorary advisor to the Wren Foundation. I believe their work represents the best of corporate responsibility, and I'm honored to contribute. More shock. Callum's expression remained neutral, but I saw the slight widening of his eyes. The vote proceeded without Gregory's motion on the agenda. Routine business, calm waters. Afterward, in his office, Callum turned to me with something between admiration and exasperation. You went to see him? I did. Without telling me. You would have stopped me. Yes. He moved closer. Because my father is a manipulative, bitter man who spent 12 years trying to destroy me. He's also broke, humiliated, and terrified of public embarrassment. I met his eyes. He wasn't going to stop, Callum. Not until he had something to lose. So you gave him something. I gave him a way out that preserved his pride. Same thing I gave Meredith. Same thing I'd want someone to give me. He was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled me close, pressing his forehead against mine. When did you become more strategic than me? Maybe I always was. You just weren't paying attention. He laughed. A real laugh. Free and unguarded. I'm always paying attention to you, Joe. That's the problem. Is it a problem? The best kind. The seasons turned. The Wren Foundation grew from a single office to a network spanning 3 cities. Our work expanded beyond corporate theft to include whistleblower protection, workplace harassment advocacy, systemic corruption investigation. I became someone I hadn't expected, a public figure. Speaking engagements, media appearances, congressional testimony on intellectual property reform. The rescued bird had become something else entirely, and through it all, Callum was there, not as a saviour, not as a protector, as a partner, someone who challenged me, supported me, gave me space to fail and room to grow. We were married on a spring afternoon at Hartland Manor, in the same ballroom where he'd first said 2 words that changed everything. She's mine. But standing at the altar, watching him watch me walk toward him, I understood something that had taken years to learn. I wasn't his because he'd claimed me. I wasn't his because he'd saved me from exile or given me back my career. I was his because I'd chosen him, because he'd earned my trust, tested my strength, seen me at my worst and stayed anyway. And he was mine, for exactly the same reasons. Later that night, after the guests had gone, and the caterers had packed up, and Hartland Manor had quieted to its centuries-old stillness, we stood on the balcony overlooking the grounds. "Do you remember the first time you served champagne here?" he asked. I remember watching Meredith laugh at me from across the room, thinking my life was over. And now? I looked at the ring on my finger, at the man beside me, at the sprawling future we'd built from wreckage and choice. Now I know it was just beginning. He pulled me close, and we stood there in the darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one, over an estate that had once made me feel invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. I never would be, again. The gala's champagne was still flowing when I found a quiet corner, my feet aching in heels I still hadn't learned to love. A young woman appeared beside me, nervous in an ill-fitting blazer, a tray of canapes balanced precariously in her hands. "Sorry, I'm not supposed to be here," she said, flustered. "Service staff aren't allowed on the main floor." "It's fine." I smiled at her. "You look like you could use a break." She relaxed slightly. "It's my first event. Everything's so—" She gestured at the crystal chandeliers, the Italian marble, the wealth dripping from every surface. "Overwhelming. I remember the feeling." "You work here?" I glanced down at my gown, burgundy silk, the colour I'd claimed as my own, and back at her confused expression. "I used to," I said. "A long time ago." Callum appeared at my elbow, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. The young woman's eyes went wide with recognition. "Everything all right?" he asked, handing me a glass. "Just making a new friend." I turned back to the server. "What's your name?" "Rachel. Rachel Okonkwo." "What do you do when you're not working events, Rachel?" "I'm—" She hesitated. "I was in accounting, before my company downsized. Now I do whatever pays the bills." I reached into my clutch, pulled out a business card, the Wren Foundation logo embossed in gold. "Call this number on Monday. Ask for Helen. Tell her Joe sent you." Rachel looked at the card, then back at me, confusion giving way to something like hope. I don't understand. You will. I squeezed her arm. Trust me. As she disappeared back toward the kitchen, Callum raised an eyebrow. Another project? Another choice? I slipped my hand into his. That's all any of us need sometimes. Just someone who sees us. He pressed a kiss to my temple. You continue to surprise me, Josephine Vance. Joe, I corrected him. Joe, he smiled, that rare unguarded smile that still made my heart stutter. Shall we go save more worlds? Always. We walked back into the light together. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more stories from Mr. Douglas, where every fall becomes a rise.